Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really glad to have with me once again Dr. Quinton Hennigh. He's an exploration geologist who is very highly regarded amongst his professional peers. He is the president and CEO of Novo Resources. It's a company that I've been following now for a couple of years. Dr. Hennigh is not only held in high esteem by his peers, but he is credited with being a very creative thinker. And indeed, it is his ability to think scientifically outside of the conventional wisdom box in the field of geology that I think makes Dr. Quinton and the company that he heads up, Novo Resources, one of the most exciting stories that I have heard and have looked at in several decades in writing my newsletter about junior mining companies. Dr. Hennigh has led a very successful exploration efforts in the past, having played a major role in the discovery of at least 3 significant deposits. He received his PhD at the Colorado School of Mines, and that was really in the area that he has really utilized very much in his work in mineralogy and exploration geology. So welcome, Quinton. It's really good to have you with me again.
Thank you very much, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here.
Always good to talk to you. A very, very interesting story. Novo Resources trades in Canada under the symbol NVO, and you can buy it in the United States, as I have, under the symbol NSPRF. Nancy, Sarah, Peter, Ralph, Frank. Earlier in the day, at least, it was trading in Canada at $1.05. It puts it around 80 cents or so in the U.S. money, but it's got a market cap of around 52 million U.S., something like that. So, Quinton, while you've been involved in many projects throughout your career, sort of traditional projects, I guess, much more, this one that you're working on now is really quite unique. And I think what's really interesting here is how you've come up with a theory. Your work at the Colorado School of Mines, as I understand it, also at Newmont, you had a chance of examining and looking at Witwatersrand rock. Now, the Witwatersrand, for those who may not be familiar, is one of the largest gold deposits, I think, in the world. I mean, I think something like 1/3 to 1/2 or something like, correct me if I'm wrong, Quinton, but major portion, a big chunk of all the gold that's ever been mined on Earth has come from this one area of South Africa. So, Quinton, you had a theory, the traditional theories about how the Witwatersrand deposit was formed, you weren't satisfied with. Tell us why not, and then tell us what you came up with, what your theory was.
Sure.
Or is.
All right. To give a little context for listeners, the Wits is a very large deposit, as you described. It effectively is, if you think of it as the Middle East of gold, that's a good analogy. The Wits Basin is located in South Africa. It covers an area of about 30,000 square kilometers. It has at least 5 major gold fields, each of which have contributed at least 200 million ounces in production. Now, this gold is hosted by sedimentary rocks. Many people think of gold as occurring in veins and maybe disseminated in intrusions, magmatic intrusions, things like this. Wits is a different type of deposit. It's hosted by conglomerates, and the gold that occurs in these conglomerates is of great controversy as to how it got there. There's 2 main theories, I would say, over the past 100 years, that 2 main theories that have really, tried their best, say, to explain how this gold originated in the conglomerates. One says that the gold was washed in. It was actually brought in by waters as they washed gravels out of a highland somewhere. That highland, nobody's quite sure where it was situated, but the idea is that these rivers washed the gravel down to the ocean or to the shoreline and deposited these gravels in sheet-like formations along with gold. It's a good idea. It's an interesting idea. It's very easy to wrap one's mind around this idea that these are fossil alluvial deposits in the kind of the conventional sense. But there's some problems with that. Firstly, the gold in the Wits tends to be fairly fine grain. One would expect the gold to be dispersed, not necessarily concentrated in such an environment, being fine grain as it is. The second issue is, and this is really, really important, it's just it's kind of mind-boggling to think that there would have been lode gold deposits, meaning like veins and things like this, that would have contained enough gold to then be eroded and shed into this basin, forming these vast deposits. Now, it's just almost hard to fathom how you could create something like this. Now, to give you where I'm coming from, if you think about the Superior Province in Canada, say, it's a big greenstone belt or granite greenstone terrain that is of similar age to the Vits. And let's say, that it took something like the Superior Province to erode and then form the Witwatersrand Basin. Well, the Superior Province to this point has only yielded something like 250 million ounces of gold. Yet the Vits, the mined gold out of the Vits is nearly 1.5 billion, and there's around another 1.5 billion ounces left in inventory as reserves, resources, and so forth.
Wow.
So, it's basically an order of magnitude more gold than you could generate from the most prolific granite greenstone terrain on Earth. So that's hard to answer. All right, so the second model that explains the formation of the Witwatersrand is called the hydrothermal model. It basically argues that hot waters, may be associated with magmatism at depth. These hot waters emerged into these sedimentary rocks, brought along dissolved gold, and precipitated that gold in these conglomerate horizons. There's some issues around this model. For one, we don't really see any concentrations of gold along the actual faults and structures that these geologists, postulate brought these fluids in. So it's almost as if these fluids magically evaporated and dissolved or precipitated their gold and then went on their way, with leaving very, very little effect to the rocks around them. That's kind of astonishing. The second issue and argument that is against this is that it's the same argument I just gave for the alluvial deposits. How do you create a huge hydrothermal gold system like this? The biggest hydrothermal gold deposit on Earth is perhaps the biggest single, I should say, hydrothermal gold deposit, perhaps Marantal, which is in Uzbekistan. It's something on the order of 150 million ounces in one deposit. Here in the United States, we have the Carlin District, which is several deposits, but it's comparable size. Again, the size of the biggest hydrothermal deposits we can see is well under an order of magnitude smaller than the Vits. So again, it's a difficult one to explain. I'm going to jump into my views.
Yes, please.
Unless you have any questions here.
I would just tell our listeners that I hope you're following Dr. Quinton, because this may sound like something you nodded your head over when you were taking your geology course that you were forced to take in Geology 101. But believe me, it's not hypothetical. What we're talking about here is the potential to understand why Novo Resources may be on to something very, very significant. And so please try to follow Dr. Hennigh's, I think, very clear explanation, but for those of us who may not be, living in this world all the time, concentrate on what he has to say, because he just explained to you why it's highly illogical, the traditional explanation as to why and how the Witwatersrand, this magnificent gold deposit, was formed. So Dr. Hennigh came up with his own theories about how that much gold could have gotten in such a narrow, small area, and that's what he's about to tell us now, because this is going to lead us on to the story of Novo Resources and what he is doing in northwestern Australia now. Go ahead, Dr. Hennigh.
Okay. The shortcomings of the two models I just spoke about have to be addressed. In order to have a model that's comprehensive and really holds water, you have to address issues like this. About 20 years ago, I was working on some rock samples from the Witwatersrand Basin. I was dissolving in various acids to kind of pick apart the minerals out of these conglomerates, examine them. The work I was doing was trying to replicate some work that was done by a fellow named Dieter Hallbauer that was done, I believe, in the late 1970s. When he dissolved some rocks, he found that there were pieces of carbon. This is actual carbon, like you would think little bits of coal. It's
sure.
effectively, particles or fragments of black carbon that looked no different than the coal that would go into a power plant, okay? He found these particles as he dissolved these rocks, and he found that they had shapes and forms that resembled fossil life. Now, to put this in context, you got to think about when the Vits formed. It formed over 2.7 billion years ago, so this is very, very old. It's during a time when we don't really have a lot of information about what life would have looked like here on Earth, how it would have, what types of life forms and whatnot there were. Yet, here he was finding, effectively what looked like fossil fragments in these rocks. Now, turns out those fossil fragments are also closely associated with the gold. You often see gold in direct contact with the carbon. I did my work, dissolved several samples, found the very same structures and stuff that Dieter Hallbauer had seen, close association of carbon with gold. We did some analyses on the carbon. We found that it was a substance referred to as kerogen. Kerogen is effectively carbonaceous material that is left behind. If you say that you buried some sort of organic thing like a tree or some algae or something. Let's say you buried that in the ground, you warmed it up a bit. As that carbon decomposes, you cook off what's called bitumen, and you leave behind kerogen. Well, we found that the carbon was kerogen, so it definitely resembles carbon of organic nature, organic origin. So that gave us a lot of support. Then, after I looked at a few conglomerates, I noticed that some of the particles of carbon looked like they were detrital. They were actually pieces of carbon that had kind of broken away from something else and had tumbled into the conglomerate. And that got me thinking, well, maybe we're looking at the Witwatersrand all backwards. Perhaps the gold in this carbon is actually forming in the basin along with the deposition of the conglomerates and other sedimentary rocks. Maybe we're grasping for this elusive source that's supposed to be outside of the basin, when instead the source is actually right there in the basin, and that this gold, along with the carbon, these fossil life forms, was actually formed in those sedimentary rocks during the time of deposition. Mm. All right, so to cut a very long story a bit shorter, I know we only have about 10 minutes here. I took these ideas forward with me and started thinking about where else one might find another Witwatersrand basin. In other words, I recognize that it must be important to look at rocks that are similar age. So, I started looking around at sedimentary rocks that were, say, 2.7 to 2.9 billion years ago, old. It was also important to have the right types of sedimentary rocks, sandstones and conglomerates, things like this, and that these rocks were deposited in a nearshore environment. Now, here's the model in a nutshell. The carbon, if it appears to be indeed organic, it's closely associated with the gold. The idea is that you had shallow estuaries, or bays, if you want to think of it like that, where you had a substrate on the bottom of the ocean on which this early life would have taken root. Now, what would have been the source of gold? Well, I think the ocean water itself. If you model the chemistry of Earth's atmosphere and the ocean waters back at this time, there would have been no oxygen at that time. There would have been things like hydrogen sulfide, perhaps a bit of methane, and other reduced gases. Now, in that environment, gold is actually quite soluble. Today we have about 4 parts per trillion gold in ocean water. Back then, it could have been much higher, maybe 4 parts per billion even. So, 3 orders of magnitude more gold. Now, to put that in perspective, 1 cubic kilometer seawater would have contained 4 tons of gold, if this is the case. Now, put that gold-bearing seawater in direct contact with some of the first photosynthesizing life. So these would have been, think of them like bacterial mats or cyanobacterial mats or even algae. One of the things gold that's in soluble form does not like is oxygen. Right? As soon as it sees oxygen, that gold breaks free from whatever's helping it stay dissolved, and it precipitates. So here you have early life. It's kicking off oxygen. You've got a bit of photosynthesis developing here. That gold that's dissolved in the seawater sees that life and that oxygen being bubbled off, and boom, it precipitates out, and effectively you produce these deposits through precipitation over perhaps a long time period, maybe a few thousand years or a few tens of thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Subsequent, those were then buried up. Those algal mats, say, were buried up and preserved. And in the instance of the Witwatersrand, it was preserved quite well. Today we have huge volumes of gold. I wanted to find the next one. We looked around at basins all over the planet. We looked at something like 90 basins. I identified about a half a dozen that were similar age to the Wits. Like I said a minute ago, it took us to northwest Australia. I recognized the Fortescue group in the Pilbara region in northwest Australia was prospective for similar types of deposits. You had sandstones and conglomerates being deposited during that very special time frame from about 2.7 to 2.9 billion years ago. And lo and behold, there's gold occurrences. There's actually numerous gold occurrences across an area of several hundred square kilometers in which you can find conglomerates. Some of them have been mined, on artisanal basis. Some of them have been perhaps a little bit more extensively mined. There's alluvial, like modern alluvial gold coming off of these things, so prospectors will go out and they'll find bits of gold here and there. Anyway, it certainly looked and, kind of smelled like that duck, so to speak. It took a while to get this project put together, but, I basically structured Novo to pursue this opportunity.
Okay. All right. With the limited amount of time left here, Quinton, so you, I know one of in the Witwatersrand you had incredibly rich reefs, they're called. Like, I think you call them carbon leaders. You haven't seen that yet in your deposit, but you've seen, because you say it's where you're drilling so far, you're exploring higher up in the system, closer to the shoreline. Is that right?
Yes, we're in what's called a proximal environment. In other words, we're at a point where rivers were indeed bringing gravels in. Now we find bits of carbon, and I've shown some photos, I think, in a news release last year. Bits of carbon that are kerogen. They resemble the carbon you would see in the bits, but we haven't found anything, sensu strictu, like a carbon leader.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now you're putting a deep hole down. I think you're expecting results back from that there could be a chance. Am I saying that properly? There could be a chance that you could intersect something like that? I
would say in the deep hole that we drilled, we describe it in a news release sometime mid-December. We certainly saw conglomerates. They had smaller class size, so they appear to be more distal, meaning they're further from that shoreline. Whether we're in a carbon leader environment, I can't say for sure. The other thing people have got to bear in mind, we have several thousand square kilometers of ground.
Yes.
So we're basically just getting our feet wet here. We're starting to step out and see what's out further in the basin. To put it, a different way, we've drilled up a bit of a resource there at Beaton's Creek, and we're looking to advance that as quickly as possible. You can read our news releases late last year about taking this thing towards production. But now we're starting to look at the geology of the basin as a whole. That first deep hole we drilled, quite interesting. It had some nice sulfide-bearing conglomerates. It's in for assay at present. We hope to see even some sniffs of gold that tell us, hey, we're going in the right direction here.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the thing that makes me excited about this is not only the prospects of coming up and possibly finding another Witwatersrand type of deposit, but it's the near-term prospects of producing. And again, Quinton, you have something like 420,000 ounces in your 43101 resource, grading 1.47 grams per ton, which isn't too bad, but in fact it's pretty good, especially given the fact that your metallurgy, as I understand it, is very straightforward, very easy easy, probably free milling, as they say. But also, I think you did some bulk sampling that suggests that possibly those grades might be higher. Is that fair to say, or is it too early to say that yet?
We do have an issue with the coarseness, and that is a bit different than the Vits here. We have both coarse and fine gold here.
Sure.
Both types. But it's that nugget effect. It's very hard to evaluate the nugget effect, and usually it gives a bit of upside, because if you think about it, if you just randomly grab a rock, you're not going to get those nuggets, and once you start processing of a large volume of rocks, you do see the nuggets. You see, so yes, we're starting to see an uptick in the grade as we do the bulk sampling. We're hopeful that once we go from drill results, say, to actual mining, that we see that bump.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're unfortunately we're really out of time now. But I would say to my listeners that you have some news coming out. You'll be reporting on that deep drill hole, I think, in the not too distant future. You'll also, at some point here, a few months down the road, perhaps updating your resource.
That's correct. We aim to update the resource with the oxide drilling that we're doing at present. We're also, as you know, taking the project to feasibility as quickly as possible. We're aiming to put the thing in production by early 2016. I've got a bit of information coming out here shortly on the mining concept, some photos and whatnot, that people can see the type of deposit we're dealing with. It's an amazing opportunity for very, very low-cost production.
Well, it certainly is an exciting story, and as I've said, it is actually my top holding, and I'm very excited about it. Of course, there's no guarantees in this business. Those of us who have been around it know it's a very high-risk, high-return business. When you're successful, you do extremely well, but this one looks good. Quinton, we're out of time. I hope to talk to you again sometime in the near future. It's Novo Resources that just people should go to your website. There's a lot of great information right there.
Thanks, Jay.